Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
Acura's all-new ADX, a compact SUV that isn't just built for one thing. It's precision-crafted for everything. To escape the grind with available all-wheel drive. To go with your flow with available Google built-in.
Hey Google, turn it up.
Okay, turning up the volume. And crafted to be heard with an available Bang & Olufsen premium sound system. The all-new Acura ADX, crafted to match your energy. Acura, precision-crafted performance.
Take your vibes and go, 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 go.
Google is a trademark of Google LLC.
The sound of praise for your Sunday morning.
The only one who could ever teach me
Introducing Reverend A.R. Bernard of the Christian Cultural Center
was the son of a preacher man.
and Rabbi Joseph Potasnik of Religion on the Line.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Now, here's the Rev and the Rabbi, where faith matters.
Good morning, I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
And Reverend, today is Palm Sunday. It also happens to be the second day of Passover. This is pre-recorded because, during the first days of Passover and the last days, we don't use technology. So I just want to assure everyone that we're following all the rules. And
disclaimer.
Right,
Okay.
yeah. And secondly, since Palm Sunday coincides with Passover, Christians are guaranteed good weather. And I think that's a good thing for everyone. We have, as our guest, the Most Reverend Bishop Robert Brennan of the Diocese of Brooklyn, which also includes Queens. And Bishop, thank you so much for being with us during this busy time.
Thank you. Glad to join you.
One of the things, Reverend and Bishop, that I find so special in New York is that we all enjoy a close relationship. It doesn't take a holiday, it doesn't take a tragedy to bring us together. We're there for each other in the in-between, so to speak. And I think that's an example of the best of interfaith relationships. And I said to the Reverend recently, in order to have a good interfaith relationship, you have to have inner faith. You have to know who you are so you can have meaningful dialogue with the other person. So let's talk about Palm Sunday. There's ritual attached to it. Talk about that ritual and what it means.
Well, for us, and for all of us, for both in the Jewish world and the Christian world, the whole week is tied up with ritual in a very powerful way. A ritual of remembering what God has done for us in the past and continues to do through that saving action. So, for us, the Palm Sunday particularly is deeply tied to the messianic hopes, to the prophet Zephaniah, to the coming of the king as he enters into the holy city, the triumphant entry into the holy city. And then, of course, that begins the solemnity of this Holy Week, where we focus on the Lord Jesus. We focus on the cross and look with hope, with a certain hope in his resurrection. So this week that begins today on Palm Sunday with the triumphant entry comes to a crescendo on Easter Sunday as we celebrate our Passover from death.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we part ways here, Jews and Christians, in terms of the view of the Messiah. We don't accept Jesus as the Messiah. We accept Jesus as a revered teacher. And yet we're able, thankfully, during our lifetime, to have two traditions coexist with one another. That wasn't always the case, obviously. You know, you look back at religious history, it's replete with conflict, with bloodshed. Thankfully we are here now, but let's look back a bit. I remember my dad told me, he grew up in Poland, and he said when he came to Good Friday and days of Holy Week, Jews were somewhat fearful of walking in the streets because, they were seen as being guilty of deicide, and we were able, through a commitment to change, to see a different liturgy, a different period, a different spirit. Talk about that, Bishop.
There are a couple of points that you would make. First of all, you speak about Poland, and there were always people who take things an extra step. There were certain things that were built into the language that was often used that was not good. But you also had in Poland in those years people like John Paul II, who was a great champion of the Jewish neighbors in those times. The other thing that you refer to is that in the wake of the Second Vatican Council, we had the document on the relations between Christians and Jews, and really made some great advances of mutual respect for one another, and we wanted to build those ties, and that's so important today. We need to be very powerful voices against any kind of religious hatred and against any kind of, particularly anti-Semitism. That's something that is a great worry, even now in our city, to see some of the rise of anti-Semitism. So we need to be powerful voices against hatred, against those attacks on human dignity that we are all created in the image and the likeness of the one who created us.
And you have been a powerful voice, as the Cardinal is, as A.R. Bernard. Thankfully, we do have allies. But I think the lesson also is that people who were adversaries yesteryear can be allies today. That, we don't stay in this fixed position, like Lot's wife, who was transfixed at the moment and wouldn't move forward. So we can look ahead to better times when people say, how can we be better? As long as we ask that question and seek to move in that direction, I think we can be very optimistic.
Mr. Brennan, how do you respond to the accusations that Christians are anti-Semitic, that Christians blame the Jews for Jesus's death? How do you respond to that when these questions come up?
That's not really my experience. Again, I grew up in a later period of time. It's not my experience, and it's certainly not in the teachings of the church. So I think that something that's deeper today in terms of anti-Semitism, that I'm not sure that it's necessarily one religious group against another. I think in today's world, there are voices of hatred and division, and that's insidious.
Yeah. We're going to take a break here and be back with more conversation. The Rev The Rabbi with the Most Reverend Bishop Robert Brennan, the Diocese of Brooklyn.
So stay tuned for more of the Rev The Rabbi right here on Red Apple Radio Networks.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
And we are speaking with the Most Reverend Bishop Robert Brennan of the Diocese of Brooklyn, which incidentally also includes Queens. Bishop Brennan, thank you once again for being with us. You know, if I ask people, what's the most important day in the Christian calendar? I'm sure some would answer Christmas. Others would answer Easter. I think another group would say, well, they're both important. They both say, well, why do we have to, put one against the other? How do you respond to Easter versus, the word versus is probably wrong, Easter and Christmas?
Well, certainly Easter, the coming celebration of Easter, is the prime celebration for us, but it's all connected for us. It's all one reality, one great mystery that unfolds, and it's interesting the way our liturgical calendar works. Those mysteries kind of weave in and out; they overlap each other. So we begin, in a sense, toward the view toward Christmas in March on the Feast of the Annunciation. We weave in and out of the realities. However, Easter that was the first proclamation of the church. That's what made Christians Christian. When they experienced the risen Lord and had the power, encountered the power of the Holy Spirit, they went out and proclaimed boldly. They with conviction and boldness. Those are the two words that you hear in the Acts of the Apostles. That the resurrection of Jesus. That was the first Christian proclamation. Jesus is risen.
Yeah. If I may join my brother. Yeah, go ahead, Bishop. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, even the Gospels, it starts with the way they were written, the way they read from beginning to end, in a sense. But the beginnings were that the story of the resurrection. Then you kind of went backward in telling the story of Jesus.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that, Rabbi, that the resurrection is the cornerstone of the Christian faith. Without it, Christianity, as we know it, wouldn't exist. It's not it's not just a miraculous event. It is the central truth, that gives meaning to everything that we believe as Christians and everything that we hope for, and that's why it's so important to us.
Yeah, the fact that we can have Passover and Easter, Holy Week coinciding, I think is an important lesson about coexistence. And Ramadan just concluded. Now we have these holy days for our respective, communities. Bishop?
And even in the Christian world, this is a great year because the East and the West come together so that the Orthodox celebration of Easter also falls right within those same days. So we're really all celebrating together, and that's a great sign of hope and unity.
Yeah. Churches are filled to capacity, aren't they, on these days?
Yes, thank God.
Yeah. I mean, that leads me to, we get crowds on certain days, and then, of course, what about the week after? And Rev and I have spoken extensively about declining affiliations in different places. And I think many of us are seeing that. Any thoughts in terms of, we have to be true to ourselves. We can't just, change for the sake of change and do something that we think, this is going to attract people. It's got to be meaningful. And what we're offering is already meaningful. How do we get people who are unaffiliated to come forward and say, this is something that I could incorporate into my life? I think that's a key question we're all asking.
There are different elements of it. So first of all, you want always to be welcoming and invite, but there does have to be more. I go back to those words from the Acts of the Apostles, the boldness and with conviction. If you have to have conviction about what you believe, and for someone, I would say, words I would use often. I say this to our mutual friend Deacon Kevin McCormick. Bold bold, joyful, and unapologetic. Bold. We speak with that same boldness that the apostles had. Now that doesn't mean being obnoxious. Boldness means, we firm about what we believe. We're not going to be wishy-washy about it. Joyful. Who's going to be interested in joining a bunch of sad sacks? I mean, it's just not. Pope Francis said one of the major challenges is that too many of us Christians look like we're just coming from a funeral.
And that's important, because
but if you really believe it, then it has to change your life. If you really believe it, something has to be happening on the inside. It has to show a joy. There has to be a fruit for somebody else to say, yes, that makes sense. And then unapologetic. It's not like, well, I have to say this because I belong to this sect or this congregation. No. Bold, joyful, unapologetic. I really do believe this. And that's what those first apostles, why they were so effective. They were proclaiming something they believed with all their heart. They weren't just telling a story. We really believe this. And that is what I think will bring people to share that faith.
We have a passage which says, serve God with joy. And I think the message therein is that you can have commitment and celebration together. And I think, Bishop, you're right. In some places, and this applies to, our respective communities, going to a house of worship was not always happy, in the sense there were some people who were serious without being able to smile. And people who are there, life is difficult. You got to be able to smile, to laugh. And I think if we can accommodate that emotion in a house of worship, people will be much more responsive. And I like be bold and authentic. People respect those who are true to their convictions. My mother, when the Xerox machine came out, she said, "Joe, you don't be a copy, be authentic." And I think we have to be authentic, because who are we if we're not authentic? The word individual comes from the Latin individa, means undivided. You're the same person. You got to be authentic.
Well, let me give you an example from the Gospels. Pardon me, Rabbi, for being very specific, but one of the appearances of the risen Lord was to 10 of the apostles who were sitting in a room on Easter Sunday night. And they said Thomas wasn't there, and poor Thomas gets the name Doubting Thomas. He comes in later on after this all happened, and they tell him, the Lord's risen, we saw him. And he says, I don't think so. You're not convincing me. Well, is the story really about doubting Thomas, or is it the story about the unconvincing apostles? They're still in that room, locked away in fear and in joy. It took a couple of encounters with the risen Lord that they made their difference, that they turned, that they themselves, they had to really be filled with conviction and joy and share that with Thomas. Their first one, they were still a little confused, but after another encounter with the Lord, and with the help of the Spirit, that's when they became convincing.
Yeah. Bishop Brennan.
Rabbi, isn't it true?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Final thought. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, even in your faith tradition and many faith traditions, we struggle generationally. We struggle to rethink how our faith engages culture, especially the younger generation. So this is not new. I remember when I was young, and I was looking for some of the same answers, and didn't really understand that it was right there in front of me in the church. You experienced that as well, correct?
Yeah.
In the synagogue?
Yeah. Look, I think some of us have to do a better job of presenting, because the answers are there, but it's how it's presented. And also the persona, the individual. When you embrace someone and say, look, I want to meet you where you are and try to reach you where you are, and show that kind of empathy, that is a catalyst for change. I think people seeing someone who really cares, who's really compassionate, who's authentic, as Bishop has said, that is attractive. And I think that inspires people to come forward. On Passover, we wish each other in Hebrew, Chag kosher v'sameach. It should be kosher, you should follow the guidelines, and it should be happy. And some people say, well, Passover is so difficult. But really, when you really care about something, when it means a lot to you, it's not difficult.
That's right.
When you do it out of love,
That's right.
Right, it can be joyous.
We do it out of joy and gratitude, right? You're calling the blessings of the Lord.
Yeah. Well,
excellent.
I've enjoyed this. I wish we had more of this, more opportunities to come together, to dialogue with each other from different paths and say, that has meaning for me. I differ with you on that, but we're still members of one family, children of God. Thank you. Bishop Robert Brennan.
Thank you, Bishop, for being on the program, and thank you, our listeners.
You. And happy Passover. We'll be united in each of us in our prayer.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you. And stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of the Rev the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Radio Networks.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
All right, Rev, we're going to talk about Passover. I know you want to have some final thoughts about some of the statements that the bishop made?
Well, yeah, because, the question about Christians being blamed for, actually accused of blaming Jesus, blaming the Jews for crucifying Jesus, for killing Jesus. And of course, that led to a lot of anti-Semitism for centuries.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until after the Holocaust, nearing the close of the 20th century, that there was a theological shift amongst both Catholics and Protestants in that area. I never bought into that because the text was clear that this was orchestrated, divinely orchestrated, and individuals on earth, both the Jewish leaders at the time, not the mass of the Jewish people, but the Jewish leaders at the time who were threatened by Jesus, the Roman government, and some of the aristocracy as well. It was a conspiracy because they felt he was a threat to the power structure. So to drop it on the Jews like that is to take away from a very important text. We read Isaiah 53 in your Hebrew Bible as a text that speaks of the Messiah, that speaks of Jesus, that speaks of his birth, his growth, and ultimately his sacrifice. And it says there that God made his soul an offering for sin, going back to the sin offering under the Old Testament. So if you don't have your theology accurate, then you could come up with these ideas that the Jews were the ones who were responsible for killing Jesus, as though it was totally apart from a greater divine plan. I just had to say that.
Yeah. Well, and people looked at liturgy, and Good Friday was a reference to perfidious Jews. Statements, his blood be on our hands and that of our children. So there were texts that people used to inculpate the Jews for deicide. And a heavy price was paid for that. So that is part of history. But as the bishop said, thankfully, we have a different chapter. And that was attributable to Nostra Aetate, Pope John the 23rd, who really came in and expunged certain texts and said, no, we have to look at this differently. So we're in a better place than we were, that's for sure.
Indeed.
All right, let's talk about Passover, because that's where we are today and will be for the week. It's a story, obviously, of liberation. I think we all are familiar with the text, how Jews were enslaved for years. If you want to talk about anti-Semitism, I would say that Pharaoh was probably the first anti-Semite, in the Bible. I mean, what did the Jew, there's a Rabbi Blau, chief rabbi of Israel years ago, and also a survivor of the Holocaust. I remember I was in Rome with him. There was a meeting with the Pope, and prior to that, we all gathered amongst ourselves, and he said, over the years, I've always asked, what did we do? What is it what do you blame us for? Right? Now, I'm not talking to Christians in general. What did we do to warrant the kind of punishment that was inflicted upon us? So you look at the story of Passover, and, hundreds of years of being enslaved, and finally enjoying the liberation. And here we are today living with anti-Semitism, living with the what's going on in Israel. October the 7th is seared in the memory of so many people. That liberation is not complete.
Yeah, and again, when you peel back the layers, you'll find that a lot of it is driven by fear. With the story of the Exodus, Pharaoh proclaims that he's afraid that the Jewish people, and at that time Hebrews, because they didn't have that formed identity that they got in the wilderness experience, but the Hebrew people were multiplying at a rate, and Pharaoh was concerned that they would join forces with Egypt's enemies. So it was either a real or imagined threat that caused him to act. And it's the same thing today, a real or imagined threat that people feel coming from the Jewish people, whether you've got all the money or all the power and you're doing this. You understand what I'm saying? At the heart of it is this fear that comes into people's minds.
But going back, again to what Bishop Brennan said, it's insidious. I mean, for people to hate a people for whatever to hate a people and to be ready to destroy a people. I go back to college campuses, to have literature that says globalize the intifada, we stand with Hamas. That is outrageous. That is offensive. So we haven't seen the end of that, that plague of hatred. That
you think we ever will?
I wish I could say to you, of course we will. I'll say to you, I'm optimistic against my better judgment.
It's going to take divine intervention.
Yeah.
So a Messiah has got to come, right? But a divine Messiah.
Because we haven't done a very good job of eliminating it. It's still with us, right? It's there, and the numbers keep getting higher, and we have all the meetings and discussions and strategies, and everybody says education. Well, so we have we've had Holocaust curricula, and that still hasn't solved it. And we have people going to the best schools, Columbia and Harvard and all the others, and they're purveyors of this prejudice. So,
I heard someone say that although we advance in technology and civilization progresses, human nature remains the same.
Well,
and until we understand how to deal with human nature, I think we're going to have these conflicts, Rabbi. That's going to be our reality.
Yeah, and all we can do is counter it with a strong voice and our values, and just make sure we stand on the other side. I think people have to see that, this battle of the decent against the indecent, you have to stand with the decent. And I think one of the things that's so troubling is that there are some people who don't take a side, who don't say anything. We again, going back October 7th, we thought we were going to get, besieged with all of those who stood with us. And I have to tell you, there are many who said nothing.
Well, here's hope. Here's hope. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. appealed to the conscience of this nation and made the issue of racism a moral issue. And some very, very impactful changes were made. in the 1960s as a result of holding America responsible to a higher moral authority, and that's what we've got to do.
Yeah, but
We've
racism
got
is
to be
still here.
willing.
It's still here,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
We haven't
yeah.
eliminated
But
that. Yeah. All right.
we can't change the human heart, but we can legislate. We can create policy to
Yeah.
protect people, and that's usually where we end up, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So Passover, I mean, it's one of the nice things is you get people at the table, the Seder table. Seder means order because there's a sequence to the ritual, and you get young people to ask questions. Why is this night different? All the other questions. And I may have mentioned to you, I saw an article some time ago entitled, "Are you on asking terms with your children?" And the whole idea of being able to ask each other questions is something that is so important. We don't take people for granted. We want to know what they're thinking and why they're thinking that particular, sentiment. And if it's something that we don't agree with, let's have at the table. Let's have a serious discussion as long as it's respectful. I used to have a friend of mine.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
A friend of mine was a rabbi years ago. I loved him. Baruch Silverstein, who was a rabbi in Brooklyn. He said, "Joe, I respect all Jews, except Jews who don't respect all Jews." And I would extend that. And I would extend that to the larger community. I respect all people, but not those who don't respect all people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me ask you something about questioning.
Yeah.
You talk about, because I remember in my early days in the Christian faith,
We're really
because
going far back.
I
Okay.
came,
Yeah.
I came from another religious belief system, but uh, I was told that you don't question God, you just obey. Of
Interesting.
course, as I've grown and I've studied and I've learned that that's not the case. It's not true. In your faith tradition, because we're it's all about questioning. It's all about wrestling with Scripture, wrestling with what we understand to be the character and nature of God. How about in your faith tradition?
I think back of that famous scene in Fiddler on the Roof where, when a question is raised, the answer is tradition. Don't ask any more. Tradition. We believe very seriously in questioning and challenging. Look, it was Abraham who challenged God, right? How can you destroy the cities if there are good people there? Now, if Abraham could challenge God, we can challenge one another. So the whole idea of the importance of the question is rooted in our faith. If you look at the Talmud, it's people who argued with each other about a passage, about a thought. So anybody who says you can't question is really misinterpreting or distorting what it's about. If you can't ask about it, then you're on weak ground, right?
Right.
Yeah. If you really believe in your tradition, a question shouldn't be dangerous for you to examine. We're going to take a break here, Rev. And
Okay,
we'll come back. We'll have more of this program called The Rev and the Rabbi.
Right here on Red Apple Radio Networks. Stay tuned.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Faith Matters, the Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Rev, I also want to say that when we sit at the Seder table, the experience is bittersweet because obviously it's a sweet time when we have family together, but for many it's a bitter time because members of the family are not there. And I'm talking about the hostages who still haven't been released. It's very hard for us as a people to sit and have that full joy when there are people who are suffering under the most inhuman conditions. So we'll have an empty chair, we'll have pictures, names, but we can't have that Passover Seder without recalling those who have still not been reunited with their families.
Yeah, I agree. It's a call to be mindful of injustice in the present and to live as people shaped by the experience of the divine deliverance and, like you said, liberation and freedom, and also moral responsibility. I think it calls it. Calls us to that.
I'm glad you said that, because I mentioned to some people that there's an interesting custom I found. We put on the table a cup of wine for Elijah, to welcome Elijah. This is the cup called Elijah's cup. And we fill that cup, and then we open the door, hoping that Elijah will enter and announce the coming of the Messiah. The custom I found is that in some communities, they would put the cup of Elijah on the table empty, and each person had to pour wine from his or her own cup till you filled that cup. In other words, you want to see something dramatic occurring in your life, you want to see a positive change, then you just mentioned that moral accounting, moral responsibility, you have to do something. Don't wait for others to bring about the arrival of Messiah. You have to contribute.
Yeah, I think it goes back to being the change that you want to see others and that you want to see within in society. It's so important. We all have to feel that sense of responsibility to the greater good. Because if we're not connected to it, we can fall victim to injustice, as we've seen throughout history.
Yeah, and that's why on a local level, you have to participate in elections. Because if you want change, you got to vote. You can't sit back and say, I don't care, I don't like the candidate. No. You have to take a stand here. And look, I never tell people who to vote for, although sometimes I tell them who not to vote for. And when you have people, as we have, in an election that are endorsed by the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, who are consistently anti-Israel, say things that are anti-Semitic, well, make sure you vote for the other side. Make sure you get out and vote so that side doesn't win. And, we have ranked choice voting in New York, but it's very important to look at the candidates carefully and to say, I cannot vote against someone who's against my own people. Look, I wouldn't vote for someone who's a racist. I won't vote for someone who's an anti-Semite.
I agree 100%. I think we need to stress, as we talk about voting, we have to talk about the importance of local elections, because that's where it really happens. You figure when we vote for a president, they get into office, they've still got to deal with a Congress. They've got to still deal with electeds who have been elected on a local level. And they're the ones who are going to represent their communities. So they say, all politics is local, because that's where it's so important.
And elected officials have a responsibility to speak out as well, and not to just try to be popular. Someone told me about a movie he was involved in making about a member, I think it was the New York State Assembly, where he voted a certain way, knowing full well it was not popular, but it was principled with him. And he lost the election because of how he voted. But he voted and said, because I had to vote my conscience. And I think some politicians say, how do I get reelected? And let me make sure I vote in a way that, suits the people who elected me, not necessarily what I believe in. And you have to be willing to pay a price for being unpopular sometimes.
I think if people are honest, really honest, no one candidate, no one political party represents all of our concerns.
Mm-hmm.
That's, if you're honest with that, right, then you can take a different posture when it comes to people on the other side of the aisle politically. There's good and bad from both sides, and I think if we take that attitude, it will temper us a bit, so that we don't get caught up in the polarization, the anger, the demonization that we've seen in our nation over the last decade or so, especially.
Ed Koch used to sit behind these microphones and say, if you agree with me 100%, you need a psychiatrist. The whole idea of this 100% or nothing, the sum total, a zero sum total, it's so wrong. It's so offensive that because you belong to a certain party, you have to endorse everything, in that party. Like Mike Huckabee was just, nominated and approved by the Senate to be ambassador to Israel. Only one Democrat voted for him. Now, you want to tell me that Mike Huckabee is not deserving of more than the John Fetterman voting for him? But because he's from a different party and he takes some different views, not dangerous views, but he takes some different views, you can't vote for him because you're out of loyalty to your party stance? And
look at the political climate also, Rabbi, influences some of that, because there are probably Republicans who are concerned about some of the policies, some of the things that are being suggested by their own party. And the same thing with Democrats. But they're afraid because of the backlash that comes with that. So they will toe the line,
Look, we had a guest on some time ago. I think it was Peter King, Congressman Peter King, and he said in Albany, if a Democrat introduces legislation, it's almost impossible to get a Republican to support the legislation, regardless of what it is, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why it's so threatening to people to disagree. What is wrong with that? I mean, don't we teach people to stand up for what you think is right? This is America, free speech and all that. And the minute you say something that others find, disagreeable, oh, no. That's it. You're out. You're an idiot or whatever it is. And social media enhances that ability to disparage another human being because you're afraid to disagree with someone on the merits.
Yeah. Look, it's true, but I'm going to reemphasize the need to vote, not just when presidential elections come around or gubernatorial. You've got to vote in local politics because local officials are responsible for budgeting, determining how tax revenues are spent within the community. Their choices will dictate funding for schools, emergency services, what else? Infrastructure projects and more. So it's so important that you don't go to sleep and wait for the next presidential election. No, local elections, they're critical because they become foundation for broader political change. And we've got to say that again and again and again, because the tendency is, and Pew Research did a report on this, that the big election, the presidential election, people get involved, they take sides, do what they do, and then they go back to sleep because they don't show up on a local level.
Yeah. And I think when you go to vote, and I learned this from my parents, be concerned about the welfare of your own people. It's not selfish to go in and vote for your own people's priorities. Do what's good because, we spend a lot of time fighting for others, but fight for your own. Rev, thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation today.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Rabbi. And hopefully our audience is getting something of substance that they could use and inspired to think about these things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what it's about. Yeah. So thank you for tuning in to the Rev and the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Radio Networks. Till next time, God bless.